Imagine lying on a wooden table in 1863, a musket ball buried somewhere in your shoulder, while a surgeon leans over you with nothing but a metal probe and his own fingers. He cannot see the bullet. No one can. He digs, guided by guesswork and your screaming, hunting for a piece of lead the size of a marble somewhere inside living flesh. If he finds it, you might live. If he doesn't, the infection almost certainly finishes what the bullet started. For all of human history, the inside of a living body was a locked room. Doctors could touch you, listen to you, cut you open, but they could not look inside you and leave you whole. A broken bone was set by feel. A swallowed coin was a mystery. A tumor was a rumor until the day it killed you. Surgeons operated half-blind, and patients paid for that blindness in pain, in limbs, in lives. And then, on a single winter night in a German laboratory, a physicist noticed a faint green glow that should not have existed. Within weeks, a doctor in New Hampshire would use that glow to photograph the broken wrist of a boy who'd fallen while skating. The first time in America, anyone had seen inside a living patient without cutting. But this gift came with a shadow. The same invisible rays that let us finally see would quietly kill some of the people who found them. This is the story of how humanity learned to look through the human body, and what it cost. Stay with me, because to understand the miracle, you have to start in the dark, the locked room. To feel what this discovery meant, you have to first understand how helpless medicine really was. Picture the middle of the 19th century. A person falls from a horse and lands badly. Their leg is clearly broken, but broken how? Is it a clean crack, or is the bone shattered into pieces? Has a jagged edge torn into the muscle? The doctor cannot know. He can only feel the limb through the skin, listen for the grind of bone against bone, and make his best guess. He sets the leg the way he thinks it should go, binds it, and waits. Sometimes it healed straight. Often it healed crooked, leaving a person to limp for the rest of their life on a bone that had knit itself back together in the wrong shape. Now imagine something worse. A child swallows a needle. A worker gets a splinter of iron driven deep into his hand. A patient develops a mysterious pain in the belly. In each case, there was no way to look. The only tool for seeing inside a living body was the knife, and cutting a person open in an age before reliable anesthesia and before anyone understood germs was often a death sentence in itself. Exploratory surgery meant opening the body just to find out what was wrong, and many patients died from the search rather than the disease. Nowhere was this blindness crueler than on the battlefield. During the American Civil War, Army surgeons faced a flood of wounded men carrying soft lead bullets that flattened and tumbled through flesh, shattering bone. To save a life, a surgeon first had to find the bullet, and he did it the only way he could, by pushing a slender metal probe into the wound, or simply his own unwashed finger, feeling around inside a conscious man for a lump of metal he could not see. It was agonizing, imprecise, and it drove infection deeper with every attempt. When surgeons couldn't locate the damage, they fell back on the one procedure they trusted: amputation. Tens of thousands of men went home from that war missing arms and legs, not always because the limb couldn't be saved, but because no one could see well enough to try. This was the world. The body was a sealed box, and medicine was the art of guessing what was inside it. For thousands of years, that had simply been the way things were. No one imagined it could be otherwise. What? The glow that shouldn't have been there. The man who cracked open that sealed box was not a doctor at all. He was a 50-year-old physics professor named Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen, working at the University of Würzburg in Bavaria, and he was not even trying to see inside anyone. On the evening of November 8, 1895, Röntgen was alone in his laboratory, experimenting with something called a Crookes tube, a sealed glass bulb with most of the air pumped out, wired so that an electrical current would race across the vacuum inside. When the current flowed, The tube produced a faint glow and invisible streams of energy that physicists of the day called cathode rays. Scientists across Europe were fascinated by these tubes, and Röntgen wanted to study them carefully. To do that, he wrapped his tube completely in heavy black cardboard, sealing out every trace of its light, and he darkened the room so that nothing could distract his eye. He switched on the current, and across the room, on a workbench several feet away, something began to shimmer. It was a small screen he'd coated with a chemical that glows when energy strikes it, and it was flickering with a faint green light. This made no sense. The tube was sealed in black cardboard. The cathode rays everyone knew about could travel only a couple of inches through open air before dying out. They could never cross the room. Whatever was making that screen glow was passing straight through the cardboard, straight through the air, and it was invisible. A lesser scientist might have dismissed it as a trick of tired eyes. Röntgen did the opposite. He became obsessed. For the next 7 weeks, he practically lived in that laboratory, sleeping and eating there, telling no one what he had found, not colleagues, not friends. He held objects between the tube and the screen and watched the shadows they cast. Wood, rubber, thin sheets of metal. The mysterious rays passed through some materials easily and were blocked by others. He was mapping something no human being had ever knowingly seen. And because he genuinely did not know what this new form of energy was, he gave it the name a mathematician gives to an unknown quantity. He called it X, the hand that saw its own death. Then came the moment that would change medicine forever, and it happened almost by accident. At some point during those secretive weeks, Röntgen placed his own hand in the path of the rays and looked at the glowing screen. And there, in ghostly outline, he saw the bones of his own fingers moving inside the shadow of his flesh. On December 22, 1895, he asked his wife, Anna Bertha, to help him capture it. He had her rest her hand on a photographic plate and hold it perfectly still while the rays did their work. The exposure took around 15 long minutes. When the plate was developed, it showed something no one in history had ever seen: the dark, delicate bones of a living human hand, the flesh reduced to a faint gray haze around them, and on one finger, the solid black ring of her wedding band, floating over the skeleton beneath. Anna Bertha stared at the image of her own bones and was horrified. She is said to have whispered, "I have seen my death." She had spent her whole life inside that body, and now she was looking at the skeleton she would one day become. For her, it was a ghost. For her husband, it was proof. The first picture of the inside of a living person, made without a single cut. On December 28, 1895, Röntgen submitted a short scientific paper describing his new kind of ray and its almost unbelievable ability to pass through solid matter. He included the image of the hand. It was one of the most restrained, cautious documents in the history of science, and it was about to set the entire world on fire. Röntgen mania. When the news broke in early January 1896, it did not spread. It detonated. Within days, newspapers across Europe and America were shouting about the miraculous rays that could photograph the bones inside a living hand. The image of Anna Bertha's skeleton hand was reprinted everywhere, passed from paper to paper, gawked at by millions. People could scarcely believe it was real. A German professor had found a way to see through solid flesh, and suddenly the impossible was sitting on breakfast tables around the globe. What followed was a strange public frenzy that came to be called Röntgen mania. Ordinary people were thrilled and terrified in equal measure. If these rays could see through a hand, could they see through a wall, through clothing? Nervous shoppers were sold X-ray-proof underwear. Newspapers ran cartoons about the death of privacy. Showmen set up booths where, for a few coins, curious customers could peer at the bones of their own hands. The rays were a scientific breakthrough and a carnival attraction at the same time. But the serious world moved just as fast. When Röntgen demonstrated his discovery before a scientific society, he made a live image of the hand of a distinguished anatomist in the audience. The man was so stunned that he proposed the rays be named in Röntgen's honor. Röntgen rays, a name still used in much of the world today. Doctors immediately grasped what physicists had only glimpsed. This was not a curiosity. This was a way to finally see inside the human body. And here, the character of the man behind the discovery mattered enormously. Röntgen could have made himself one of the richest people alive. He refused to patent the rays. He believed a discovery of this magnitude belonged to all of humanity, and he wanted nothing standing between his rays and the sick. He took no fortune from the greatest medical breakthrough of his age. Years later, when he received the very first Nobel Prize ever awarded in physics, he gave the prize money away. A boy on the frozen river. While Europe buzzed, the discovery leapt across the Atlantic, and America's first patient was a boy who had simply been out having fun on the ice. His name was Eddie McCarthy, a young resident of Hanover, New Hampshire. That winter, he'd been skating on the frozen Connecticut River when he fell and broke his left wrist. It was the kind of ordinary childhood accident that happened every winter, and normally the story would have ended with a doctor setting the bone by feel and hoping for the best. But Hanover was home to Dartmouth College, and at Dartmouth 2 brothers had been following the news from Germany with intense excitement. Gilman Frost was a professor of medicine. His brother Edwin was an astronomer and physicist. Working in the physics laboratory in Reed Hall, they had managed to build a working setup and had already made X-ray images of lifeless objects. Now they wanted to try something no one in America had done. Photograph the broken bone inside a living patient. Eddie McCarthy was that patient. On February 3rd, 1896, just weeks after Röntgen's paper crossed the ocean, the Frost brothers laid the boy's injured wrist against a photographic plate and exposed it to the rays. When they developed the image, there it was, the break in the bone, plainly visible, no cutting, no probing, no guessing. It is remembered as the first clinical X-ray taken in the United States. Think about what that image meant standing in that laboratory. For the entire history of the country, through every war, every accident, every shattered limb, no American doctor had ever been able to look at a broken bone inside a living person and simply see it. Now a college astronomer and his physician brother had done exactly that, for a boy with a skating injury in a New Hampshire physics lab. The locked room had a window. The knowledge spread with astonishing speed because the tools were, by the standards of the age, almost simple. The glass tubes and photographic plates needed to make X-rays were already sitting in laboratories and workshops everywhere. Within months, doctors, professors, and tinkerers across America were building their own machines. In Chicago, an experimenter turned the rays on a woman with advancing cancer, marking one of the first attempts to treat disease with radiation rather than just photograph it. The revolution was not confined to a few great institutions. It was everywhere at once, moving faster than anyone could control. And that speed, that lack of control, was about to reveal the terrible other side of the discovery. The invisible price. In those first thrilling months, almost no one asked a simple question. If these rays could pass through solid flesh, what were they doing to the flesh as they passed? The answer came slowly and then horribly. Early users began to notice strange things. Skin that had been exposed to the rays turned red, as if sunburned. Hair fell out. Then came burns that would not heal, sores that deepened instead of closing, and a creeping, relentless damage that seemed to eat away at the body from the inside. But the machines were crude, and the exposures were brutally long. Where a modern X-ray takes a fraction of a second, an early image might require the patient and the operator to sit under the rays for many minutes at a time, soaking up doses of radiation almost beyond imagining by today's standards. And no one yet understood that the harm was cumulative, adding up quietly with every single exposure. The most haunting American example of that price has a name: Clarence Daly. Daly was a skilled glassblower from New Jersey, one of Thomas Edison's most trusted assistants. When Edison, never one to miss a sensation, threw himself into perfecting the new rays, he put Daly to work at his laboratory building and testing the equipment. Edison wanted a better way to view the rays, and the search meant producing thousands of tubes and testing them over and over. Daly became the human instrument of that testing. Again and again, day after day, he placed his own hands directly in the path of the rays to check whether a tube was working. It was the quickest way to see the bones and know the device was good. He had no idea he was slowly cooking himself. Daly's work helped Edison develop a far brighter viewing screen and a practical handheld device for looking at the rays in real time. It was a genuine advance, but the cost was written on Daly's body. His left hand, the one he used most for testing, reddened, swelled, and began to ache with a pain that never left. When it grew unbearable, he switched to his right hand and kept working. His hair fell out. His skin wrinkled and broke down. Sores appeared that refused to heal, and skin grafts wouldn't take. By the early 1900s, the damage had become cancer. Doctors amputated to try to stop its spread, taking his arms in a desperate attempt to save the rest of him. Nothing worked. In October 1904, Clarence Daly died at the age of 39. His is remembered as the first death from radiation in the United States. A man killed by the very rays he had helped bring into American medicine. Even Edison was shaken. He had suffered eye trouble from staring into the fluorescent screen himself, and Daly's suffering horrified him. He walked away from X-ray research entirely, and he said plainly that he was afraid of the rays and the other strange new radiations being discovered. One of the boldest inventors of the age looked at what these rays did to a loyal friend and decided some doors were not worth opening. Daly was not alone. Around the world, a generation of early experimenters, the operators, the doctors, the enthusiasts who worked closest to the tubes, sickened and died from burns and cancers. They are sometimes called the martyrs of radiology. They paid with their hands and their lives for a lesson no one had known needed learning, that the light which lets us see through the body can also destroy it. Learning to respect the ray. The deaths did something important. They forced a reckless miracle to grow up. Out of that early wreckage came the slow, hard work of learning to use the rays safely. Experimenters figured out how to shorten exposures dramatically, cutting the time a patient spent under the rays from many minutes down toward a flicker. Others learned to shield the parts of the body that didn't need to be photographed and to protect the operator standing beside the machine every day. What had begun as a carnival trick and a race for glory matured into a genuine profession. Radiology, built around the understanding that these rays demanded caution and respect. And the medical payoff was staggering. Almost overnight, the oldest problems in surgery began to dissolve. A broken bone could be photographed, examined, and set correctly the first time. A bullet or a swallowed object could be located precisely before a surgeon ever picked up a knife, turning a blind, bloody search into a targeted operation. Within a couple of years, Army doctors were carrying X-ray equipment onto battlefields to find the metal buried in wounded soldiers. The exact problem that had tormented Civil War surgeons just a generation earlier, now solved by a glowing plate. Diseases of the lungs, hidden fractures, deformities of the skeleton, foreign objects lodged where no hand could reach. All of them stepped, for the first time, out of the shadows and into view. The locked room was open for good. Now what the ray still whispers. Now come back to the present and look at how completely this transformation has folded into ordinary life. Today, seeing inside a living body is so routine that we barely notice it. A child breaks an arm on a playground, and within the hour, a machine makes an image of the bone in a fraction of a second. A far cry from the 15 minutes Anna Bertha held her hand still, and delivering a tiny sliver of the radiation, that once killed men like Clarence Daly. Dentists photograph the roots of your teeth. Airports see through luggage. Doctors screen for cancers, guide needles, check newborns, and peer into the chest and skull and belly, all descended from that faint green glow on a workbench in Würzburg. Röntgen's refusal to lock his discovery behind a patent helped make sure it belonged to everyone, and it does. But the ray still carries its double nature, and we still live with the balance the pioneers died to teach us. The same energy that reveals a tumor can, in careless amounts, cause one. Every image is a small trade, a measured dose, weighed against what it lets a doctor see. The debates that surround modern scans, the careful limits, the lead aprons, the shielding, all of it traces straight back to the burned hands of the men and women who worked too close to the tubes before anyone knew better. Conclusion. Return one last time to that surgeon in 1863, bent over a wounded man, digging blindly for a bullet he will never see. For thousands of years, that was the human condition, to be sealed inside our own bodies, opaque even to the people trying to save us. Every ache was a guess, every wound was a mystery, every broken bone was set on faith. It took a stray green glow that a lonely physicist refused to ignore. It took a wife staring in horror at her own skeleton, a boy who fell while skating on a frozen river, and a glassblower who gave his hands and then his life testing the rays that would go on to save millions. The window we now take for granted, the everyday, unremarkable act of seeing inside a living person, was cut open by human curiosity and paid for in human suffering. So the next time you see a doctor slide an X-ray onto a screen and read the story of a bone as easily as reading a page, remember that this was once impossible. Remember that within living memory, the inside of your own body was a locked room that no one could enter without a knife. An invisible ray opened that door, and the people who found it, brilliant and reckless and brave, changed forever what it means to be seen.